The four Northeast Asian economies do not get along. Only America's two largest overseas military deployments, in South Korea and Japan, keep the locals from being at each other's throats. Only the threat of American naval power prevents the Chinese from trying something cute. Whether because of local historical anger and angst or American departure, in the world unfolding, there will be no way on earth the East Asians are capable of the sort of productive cooperation necessary to enable broad-spectrum, multimodal, integrated, and peaceful manufacturing supply chains. The Northeast Asians are politically, strategically, and culturally incapable of the degree of trust required to form their own version of NAFTA, much less the kind of joint decision-making that defines the European Union. There's the demographic angle. In calendar year 2019, China suffered the greatest decline in its birth rate on record. Sad to say, it was expected. The one-child policy had depressed China's birth rate for long enough that China is now running out of 20-somethings, and 20-somethings are the people who have the kids. Generate fewer young adults, and the new generation can't have many kids. Cram them all into urban condos, and even those who can have kids don't want to. Data from 2020 indicated an even greater drop. Instinct credits the drop to coronavirus, but it takes 9 months to generate a baby. Most of the 2020 drop, therefore, was due to circumstances and choices made in 2019. Formally, China's birth rate isn't simply the lowest since 1978. Birth rates in Shanghai and Beijing, China's largest cities, are now the lowest in the world. We are still waiting for finalized 2021 data, but anecdotals from throughout China are beyond horrid for the dominant Han population. They are even worse for the non-Han. Say what you will about Mao, but his version of communism had a bit of a soft spot for China's many minorities and allowed them exemptions to one child. In this context, soft spot means did not systematically wipe them all out. But Maoist communism is long dead, replaced by a steely neo-fascist ultranationalism. As China faces the terror of disintegration in a deglobalized world, the Chinese Communist Party has begun systematic persecution of its minorities to the point of stationing CCP officials inside people's homes to prevent them from, among other things, procreating. The Uyghurs of Xinjiang saw their birth rate drop by half just between 2018 and 2020. Instead of exceptions to one child, some of China's minorities are now de facto under a zero-child policy. Add it up, and China is now the world's fastest aging society. The demographic situations elsewhere in East Asia aren't quite so graphic, but that's not to say they are much better. Japan is already the world's oldest demography and was the fastest aging one until China took up that mantle in 2020. Korea's baby bust started 20 years after Japan's, but has progressed faster. Taiwan and Thailand are roughly a decade behind Korea. Even populous Indonesia and Vietnam, with roughly 400 million people between them, have been bitten by the urbanization bug. Neither is close to that no-return point, but their demographic structure in 2021 looks remarkably similar to China's in the 1980s. Rapid aging strikes the Asians with a triple bind. First, aging workforces may typically be more productive, but they are also more expensive. China's low-skilled labor supply peaked in the early 2000s. The end result is as clear as it is unavoidable: higher labor costs. China is no longer the low-cost producer, and it hasn't moved up the value chain fast enough to be the high-quality producer. Second, such rapid aging precludes the Asians in general, and the Chinese in particular, from ever breaking away from their export model. There simply isn't enough local consumption to even hope to gobble up everything the Asians produce. And if the Americans no longer empower the Asians to export the world over, the entire Asian model falls overnight. Third and finally, rapidly aging workforces are perfectly capable of collapsing under their own weight via mass retirement. There's the question of input access. China imports more than 70% of its 14 million barrels of oil it needs every day. Taiwan, Korea, and Japan import more than 95% of their 1, 2, and 4 million barrel needs, respectively. More than 2/3 of all their inflows originate in the Persian Gulf, a region not exactly brimming with stability under the order, much less expecting to become more stable in the aftermath of the American withdrawal. China is the biggest importer of every industrial commodity, with the Japanese and Koreans reliably showing up in the top 5. Energy aside, nearly all the industrial commodities in question come from the southern hemisphere, with Australia, Brazil, and sub-Saharan Africa being the biggest players. What doesn't come from them comes from Russia, and while I wouldn't put Chinese-Russian conflict at the top of my things that can go wrong list, it is nowhere near the bottom either. The Russians, after all, have a time-honored tradition of using resource flows to extract geopolitical concessions. Perhaps the biggest problem for the Chinese will be the Japanese. China's navy is coastal and near coastal, with only about 10% of its surface combatants capable of sailing more than 1,000 miles from shore. Very few can sail more than 2,000 miles. China has no real allies except maybe North Korea, so projecting power anywhere is a hilarious impossibility. Japan, in contrast, has a navy fully capable of sailing and fighting a continent or two away. Should push come to shove, the Japanese can simply dispatch a small task force past Singapore into the Indian Ocean and shut down Chinese resource inflows, and with them, shut down China remotely. There's an economies of scale angle. The secret sauce of the Asian manufacturing model is the region's highly variant labor markets, combined with the American-provided and subsidized security environment and global trade network. Demographic collapse is upending the former, while the American withdrawal is ending the latter. Anything that drives up costs or increases security concerns reduces the capacity of the East Asians to mount a joint effort in the world of manufacturing. Lose what makes Asia special, and there is no reason at all for Asia to continue being the global hub in that most differentiated of manufacturing markets, electronics and computing.